Good evening, everyone. My name is Nazrin Himada. I'm the curator at In ICA, which is located on Treaty 1 territory. And before we begin, I'd like to just take a few moments to give context and background to how I got here, how my family was able to make a life on these lands and territories and waters. I'm here because my family was forced off of their own lands and couldn't make a life from where they come from where my ancestors come from, which is from Palestine, from a place called Tarshiha. My grandparents were the last of my family's generation to have lived on their lands. They had to escape in 1948 because of the occupation and through a colonial system, and ran by foot across the border into southern Lebanon and became refugees in Beirut. Through these colonial systems that enforce migration and enable further colonial conquest by way of immigration in what is currently called Canada, my parents were given citizenship and have lived in many different parts of this land since 1989. I've mostly made my life in Tiohtià:ke for 15 years, the longest time I've lived in one place. And I'm honored to have moved here, to now live here, and to work here on Treaty 1 territory, the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. The art that I love is one that troubles our understanding of the world and one that shifts our ways of being in order to transform, work that moves us toward accountability, to be accountable to each other and to the promises we make, and to put us to task in order to implement change. I hope, and in my capacity to do so, these changes at Plugin will not be symbolic and are not just reduced to superficial modes of inclusivity or diversity, but are concrete and ongoing. This means that as curator of Plugin, I will continue to center the work of Indigenous artists, Black artists, artists of color, whose contribution to contemporary art is vast, has a long history, and continues to rock the foundations of colonial settler provenance. Here at Plugin, we aim to showcase programs and exhibitions that not only challenge us or encourage us to ask questions differently, but move us toward new connections, collectivities, feelings never felt before, new imaginings of otherworldly existence that give life to possibility within what often seems impossible. So it is with great honor that I'm going to pass the mic over to my co-curator, Jennifer Smith, who will tell you a bit about our exhibition, Sovereign Intimacies, which was a co-partnership with Gallery 1C03, so thank you, Jennifer Gibson, and with support from Videopool Media Arts Center.
Thanks, Nazrin. I wanted to start by just thanking you for acknowledging the amazing lands we live on and acknowledging a responsibility that we all share to the lands and the community living here. So to introduce myself, I'm Jennifer Smith. I'm the guest curator for Gallery 1C03 for this exhibition. And I have been thrilled to collaborate with Nazrin on co-curating this exhibition. It has been a true honor. I come to this exhibition through the perspective of a Métis woman who greatly values the relationships that we build through art. Sovereign Intimacies is an exhibition that grew from the relationship that Nazrin and I were building. Our care for each other was woven into the exhibition, and our care for the exhibition reflected in our care of each other and our community. We talked about artists working in similar ways to us, artists who learn from each other and who value each other. These artists are leading and complicating discussions about diaspora, culture, decolonization, all while finding a place for joy, love, and respect of each other and the lands that they live and work on. This exhibition is meant to be a continuing conversation with work in the gallery space, as well as a large component of online programming, which is mainly what we're getting to engage with currently as the gallery is closed due to COVID-19. But we're still very happy to be able to gather in this way, and specifically this evening with Wanda Nanibush. I would also like to acknowledge the other artists in the exhibition. So Hassan Ashraf, Annie Beach, Ayumi Gatto, Melanie Monteceros, Peter Morin, Mariana Munoz Gomez, M. Norbese Phillips, Iris Yuri Hugh, and Megan O'Brien, and Marianne Redhead, Cheyenne Thomas, and David Thomas. I said and there a little too quickly. So this exhibition has been a huge joy and honor and learning experience, and I'm thrilled that we get to continue online right now. So I'll hand it back over to Nazrin to introduce Wanda.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yes, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you tonight my friend, my mentor. I know one of my favorite writers. I know one of my favorite curators who I admire and look up to. And we're so lucky to have with us tonight, Wanda Nanibush. Wanda is an Anishinaabe-kwe image and ward warrior, curator, and community organizer from Beausoleil First Nation. She is the inaugural curator of Indigenous art and the co-head of the Indigenous and Canadian Art Department at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And I just want to take a minute to read what Jen and I wrote in our exhibition essay about Wanda's practice and work. So when thinking about Wanda's curatorial work, an immediate word that comes to mind is intuition, a curatorial approach that gives space and respects the body's capacity to know and to bring that knowledge and vision to fruition through an intimate process with the artists. At a talk a few years ago that took place at McGill University, Wanda expressed the significance of centering an approach to curating that feels like a gathering of friends and families in the kitchen, speaking freely, openly in an environment that is comforting and warming. This approach to curating drives her ambition to create spaces where conversations can be had among many communities who have been working toward liberation and sovereignty. Among the many seminal exhibitions Wanda has curated, like Rebecca Belmore's Facing the Monumental, Rita Laton's Fire and Light, and of course, Sovereign Acts, Wanda is also the founder of Abaquad, a powerful gathering of Indigenous artists, curators, and thinkers that focuses on an Indigenous-led conversation on Indigenous art by those who create, curate, and write about it. The last iteration took place in Sydney at the Biennial, and Wanda has also co-curated a 3-day forum, From Glissant on Fixed and Unbounded, an international event that highlighted current thinking on poet and philosopher Edouard Glissant's concept of relation. And although Wanda is quite known for her writing and curating, she has also an extensive art practice. She's a filmmaker in her own right, and we are so lucky that tonight she'll be sharing with us some of her video work and to talk about her practice as an artist. Thank you so much, Wanda, for being here.
Thank you. I'm all like shy now. That was such a beautiful introduction from a woman I greatly admire as well. I would call you a friend and a mentor as well. So this is the love we give each other, and this is why we're stronger for it. So thank you so much. And thank you, Jennifer, as well. We're just getting to know each other, but pretty soon we'll know each other so well we can run around in our skivvies. Yes, I'm Wanda Nanibush, Anishinaabe-kwe from Beausoleil First Nation, Chimnasing Dodem, Mayengan Dodem, I meant. I was thinking about language, actually, when I was outside preparing for this, and how I used to speak my language more when I would introduce myself, and then I slowly stopped. And I was thinking I need to bring it back again because I'm going to lose it if I don't keep using it. And I was also thinking about one of the people that this film is dedicated to that you will see tonight is my grandfather, Howard McHugh. And the reason I dedicated the film to him is because he taught me my language. It was my first language alongside English. And he taught me my language by walking in the bush, you know, hand in hand, my little hand in his. And he would point out plants and tell me what the plants do. And he was really knowledgeable about medicine. He was also a diehard Catholic, so he's a very complex man, but he never taught me the Catholic side, thank God. The irony of saying that is lovely. So yeah, so I was thinking about him, and I was thinking, okay, when he comes to me in my dreams, he only speaks in Indian to me, so Anishinaabe-kwe. So for a couple days afterwards, I have words and sentences and thoughts, and I'm thinking in the language, and it's always kind of a kick in my ass, like stop losing it. So part of the film is also about why I lost my language. It's the beginning of that story. So that will come up. I'm showing an old film called Arrivals and Departures because it so perfectly speaks to the thematic rather than some of my newer work. I wanted to show some clips from some newer work, but it makes things complicated online to have multiple clips. So I'm actually just going to tell some stories that are coming out of a film that I'm working on right now called A Love Letter to My People, which has been like 3 years in the making. No, probably 5 years in the making, and now is at the editing stage. So I'm very excited for that. And I also wanted to show this film because part of what colonization does is it attacks intimate spaces. And the product of that for myself has been a almost inability to speak about my private life because the entry points are really hard. And they're not like normal stories that people tell about their parents, that you can just easily pull off your tongue. You always have to think about what people are hearing and how they're going to respond when you tell a personal story. So that has made me kind of mute on a certain level with my personal life. And so this film was the first moment when I actually wanted to share something personal, but I did it in the context of a question about fiction and a question about the relationship between word and image, because I don't think the personal is so easy to access as the telling of a story. So I wanted to say that, and before the film's up, and also that I think as much as colonization impacts intimacy, intimacy then becomes a space for sovereign acts. It becomes a space for resistance, and that has been my life's work. So I think that's something else we will talk about after the film. So I just wanted to say one more thing about the word, the mush hole. You'll hear this word in the film, and people always ask me what I'm talking about. And the mush hole is one of the earliest residential schools in Canada. It is on 6 Nations outside of Toronto in a Haudenosaunee community. They sent many, many Anishinaabe to that school, especially if they were resistant. So if they kept speaking their language or if they kept misbehaving, that kind of thing, they got sent to the mush hole because it was one of the most violent disciplinary residential schools in the country. And how I found the fact that my mother went to residential school was I was reading a book on the mush hole, and they had student roles in the back, and I found her name there. And then that opened up a whole wealth of information about my history and past and why things happen the way they do, that this film begins that conversation for me. So I will just turn it over to Arrivals and Departures, and we can talk afterwards.
I remember bacon and eggs, hiding under the bed, playing under a large oval table at the police station. It was years before I knew what had happened. I was 5 and had been apprehended, along with 3 nieces, nephews, and 2 brothers. I hid under the bed because I didn't want to go, and we had been having breakfast. It's possible that I relive my childhood every Saturday morning. We were all placed in one foster home, a couple of towns away. There are so many ways to make a person feel like a dirty Indian, and I learned a few that day. We were held in the police station so they could as a home for 6 kids ranged in age 2 to 14. I didn't find this out until I was 15, sitting in a classroom, listening to one of those "don't do drugs" presentations. I felt drawn to the cop, but I didn't know why. Intuitively, I felt my little hand had held his once. He stared at me, gave me his card, saying, "I was the one who took you from your family. If you have any questions, give me a call." He looked proud of me somehow, like he'd had a hand in how I turned out. There's no fucking way I was giving him a medal. I did have questions, so I called. My mother had been away for about a week, so he deemed us unattended. Yes, she was off on a binge, and yes, we were poor. Oh, pretty boy, white boy cop, busting your chops on my reservation. What do you know? Apprehension, holding cell, judgments, and theft. Modes of containment for a picture you don't have a frame for. My story is different. My story is different. My mother was a sweet, loving woman with a really great laugh. She never talked about her mother dying when she was a teen, or her father after I was born. She never breathed a word of the mush hole that stole her childhood. She had been apprehended, too. 2 residential schools later, she knew how to love and to care, despite their education. She had a lot of pain, which periodically took her from us. Maybe a different sense of the word retreat. I was raised by my older brothers and sisters and my grandfather. And my mom, when she could, which was most of the time. Could this white man see us? Could all the white social workers see through the poverty? No, of course not. So I asked my questions and I hung up, leaving him thinking he had done the right thing. How I turned out had nothing to do with him. My life became a life of arrivals and departures. My first memory was my first departure. It's not really a memory at all.
So thank you for watching that. Yeah, it's interesting to think about where things begin. So the images come from 2 years of traveling up north. So all of that landscape is Sioux Lookout, Rainy River. It's like all north of Thunder Bay and across Thunder Bay, going in and out of different airports over about a 2-year period. I would film obsessively every single flight I took, and not knowing what I was going to do with them or why. I was just obsessed with these flight films, which is generally how I work. I collect and collect and collect and collect, and then I don't know what I'm going to do with it till later. And usually it comes out of a dream. That's where everything just sort of comes together on what I want to do with it. And I was intrigued by these long lines. So you have this landscape that's so fluid. It's full of liquid. It's got very few straight lines in it. And then the straightness and the squares that you see, I started researching them. So these tree lines that are all uniform are generally like having grown up after being clear cut. Or there are long roads where they're all logging roads or mining roads. So that part of it I made into a piece called Landmines with a NDS, mines. And then later I started thinking about, that's the big L sovereignty, right? Land. And then what is the connection to the little L sovereignty? Love. And so how is it our relationships to these lands when we come and go from them, but also other folks who come and go from them, and how we relate to them is so completely different. And thinking about love, I mean, your first relationship of love is your family. It's with your parents. And in my situation, you know, my mother going to residential school, I'm a second generation residential school survivor, ended up in foster care, which is the kind of the first moment that I'm talking about in the film. But I'm also talking about the fact that that memory, it's not mine, or it is mine, but it may not be true. So the memory of breakfast, later I found out, because the beautiful thing about Native families is that we don't have to break apart, you know, like we can come back together even when there is so much trauma involved. So me and my brothers, I am the youngest of 18 kids that my mother had, and we're a close-knit family. 2 of my brothers live here in Toronto, 3 lived in Toronto, but 1 passed away this summer. Are very close and hang out all the time. So one night we're talking, and he can't watch this video because it breaks his heart too much. It hurts him too much, so he can't see it, which is another thing I learned, you know, about what intimacy and family is about. But anyway, he said, he's like, there's no way we would have had bacon and eggs. He's like, Wanda, we were too poor. And then I was like, oh man, so why did I associate that morning, you know, hiding under the bed was true, with breakfast and bacon and eggs, you know, because it was not what happened that morning at all. But somehow that smell and that taste, I inserted that later into that memory. So that's another kind of aspect of what I was exploring in this. And the scene with the cop is a true story. That's something that actually happened. I was literally in a foster home in some cow town outside of Toronto, and the cop who took me away came in to do a don't do drugs talk. It was like brutal to like sort of have this weird feeling and then slowly and remember when he comes back to tell you that that's what happened. And for him to recognize my 5-year-old face and my 15-year-old face, but my family will say my face really hasn't changed since birth, so maybe there is that. And then thinking about the relationship, when we tell these stories, everybody has kind of preconceived ideas of who you are at that point. You know, when we share a personal story, they think they're getting you in some form. And because of the way colonization happened, I think there are too many preconceived ideas about who a foster kid is, a Native foster kid is. So I never told anyone. So even best friends of mine in high school had an idea, but they didn't really know, because I just called everyone mom and dad and just never let anyone know what was really happening in my life. So it was one way to protect myself from preconceived ideas, and a way to create a sovereign space for myself to be able to walk through life and build it how I want to be building, so that I'm not constantly having to build my identity over and against other people's perceptions of me, which is what we have as Native people from the get-go anyway, and as Indigenous women especially. So those are a couple of things there. The images, what you saw was a screening copy. There is an installation copy, which is double the length. And what I do is I take the same narrative and run it over a very different tempo and a different images to see if the tone and if a affect of the narrative changes with the image, and if the affect of the image changes. So that's also something that I was working through because I think sometimes I'm interested in the way image actually adds and helps deepen a narrative, and the format that you choose, rather than detract, actually helps you tell the full story. So the idea that truth only comes in our words of what we think is true is not reality. It's like it's full of unspoken things and silences and unseen things. Something the Anishinaabe understood very well about language, and story and truth. So there's all that. Yeah, so that's that film. The one that I feel like is a bit of a next step is this film that I'm working on right now, which is a long form experimental documentary called A Love Letter to My People. And in there, rather than telling again the big L sovereignty land story, it's there, but always coupled with people's lives and like how we live that reality. How do we live and perform sovereignty in our daily lives? How do we rebuild intimate relationships when what was deeply attacked was intimacy itself? So the hugs between a mother and a child, the love between siblings, even the way residential schools were built was to keep siblings apart, right, in their separate quarters. And it makes me think that if an entire culture is, in order to gain power over land, attacks these very intimate relationships of family, then they must be central to sovereignty and they must be central to governance. And the more I dig deep into Anishinaabe forms of governance, it all starts with the child, and it all starts with those very loving first relations. And even I was thinking even about the drum. So one of the stories I tell in this new film is this young guy who was kind of living the fast life, which that's the drugs and alcohol life, and had a baby and had a beautiful woman who was taking care of that baby because he was unable to. And he desperately, desperately wanted to take care of that child, really wanted to rebuild his family, really didn't want to repeat intergenerational trauma to his own child, but felt unable to. Went to rehab, went to all those kind of Western systems. And then Idle No More started in 2012. And in his community, they had a round dance. And at that round dance, he sat at the drum because this elder wouldn't let him go by. He was like, you sit your butt down here, It's like, he's like, no, And as somebody who probably also would be like, no, and then, do it when you're told, sat him down. And, he says after that experience of sitting at that drum and singing with those men, and then keep going back again and back again and back again, he hasn't touched drugs or alcohol. And that's like 2012. So we're sitting at what? I can't do math right now, 8 years. And has become, a father to his child and able to build all those intimate relationships that build our nation. And I do not mean with nation in the Western sense, just FYI. But it's important to start at those kinds of places. And that's where women start, right? Women often are the ones working in education, working in community health, working in all these loving and caring, children-oriented professions, community-oriented professions. And often because the Canadian system is a patriarchal and Christian system, whether you want to think it is or not, women's work is still not seen as equally valid or as equally in the vein of leadership as other forms of labor. So that's why I think that we can't have any, big L sovereignty land without the little L sovereignty love. So, so thinking about this young guy, I started thinking about the drum, right? And what is the drum? It's the heartbeat. It's technically the heartbeat of our mother. That's what we say. It has that beat. It's also the first heartbeat a baby hears when it's inside your womb. And there's a connection between those two things. This is why it's really important to dive deep into what, Mother Earth means, right? It's not some hippy dippy crap. It's a real teaching tool, So if the earth is our mother and we can learn mothering from her, all the ways in which other beings besides humans also can teach us mothering, and all the ways in which we've been giving these kind of tools like the drum to remind us of those relationships, that the heartbeat of the mother is my heartbeat as a human mother, is the heartbeat that my child has, and their child, when they're in your womb, also mimics the beat. Their beat matches your beat, and so those really ancient rhythms, are part of how we grow a human being. And I think even outside of the womb, we continue to grow them through the use of these tools. And then there's also the water connection. So, the womb is water, and then the water is the lifeblood of the mother, and we are all made of water. So you start connecting all these things together, and start thinking about how do we take these kinds of philosophies, ways of being, and raise our children with them. Or if you don't have children, raise each other, love through them, have sex through them, have all kinds of relations. I don't believe that Anishinaabe people were heterosexual or heteronormative in the Western sense. Just from all of the teachings I've got, we can be queer as fuck. So that's part of it too. That was my first film, Queer as Fuck. No, it's called The Gift. But that is what it's about. Okay. So I know we want to have some of a conversation here. So I just wanted to pull out some pieces, and then you guys can ask me questions, and also the audience who's listening, please use the chat function to ask questions, or the Q&A function.
Thank you so much, Wanda. Thank you for offering all that to us tonight. There's so much to dig into and to talk about. I want to remind the audience that you're welcome to send in your questions through the YouTube chat. I think some folks are watching this video on our Facebook page. And we also have an email, questions@plugin.org, that you can send your questions to. Jen, I don't know if you have a question to begin with, but I have many too. So I wanted to open it up to you first, if you'd like.
Could you start, Nazarene? I feel like I have some, but I want to hear yours first.
Okay. I guess, Wanda, I loved how you opened this up too by talking about language and connecting that to the process of what led you to making this film. It's a coincidence because I also just heard an interview with Sky Hopinka, who talked about starting his film practice because he was starting to learn his language as well. So I just find that
shout out to Sky. Amazing.
Yeah. It was so funny because I really just watched this interview this week. So I was thinking a lot about access to language and loss of language and how to get back to language, especially for a lot of us who because of displacement and the different formations of colonialism have been severed from it. I think about that a lot because I know I live in a body that started by speaking Arabic and now only speaks English. And I feel like this is something that is something I grapple with often, that I feel like there are certain expressions that I feel like I have access to through my body, but don't have the words to articulate them because I don't know them yet. And I think it's because of this loss of language. So I think I just wanted to maybe, I don't even know if I have so much of a question, but more of a thought about intimacy in that way, that because there's this search for language, because of this loss, that we come at expression differently. And it's kind of a searching that is also a wandering, that is also you're going after an expression that is not there yet, but exists, and that through your film work or through writing, which is what I do, then there can be access to that in some ways, and it's not necessarily in the words that we use. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think my mind is like because it's like you spark so many things that I just want to go in like 5 different directions at once. Which is like a great question. So I'll start at the end and then work my way backwards. I just had this image, like, how we learn language is through relations, it's like the reality. And now we try to learn in school or in some kind of program, right? And it's just not the same. I think about walking with my grandfather and like the kind of things he was teaching me, and the language would be the words that I know. I wouldn't know like half the things I have to say in my daily life today. It wouldn't even be part of our conversations, and then I was thinking about how I lost like the first moment, like in my very first foster home. And we were walking in the bush and I was standing, nearby, and I was like speaking my language and saying lots of things about what I was seeing. And they just turned to me and they said, stop speaking that gibberish. And they said it in such a way that made me feel like I was crazy. And then I thought, how when you're a kid, you have imaginary friends and you have like a really, I had a really rich imaginary world. So then I started thinking like, are they right? Like, am I speaking some kind of gibberish? Is this real? Is this not real? Do you know what I mean? And they, and the more that gets repeated to you, the more that you start to really question, or you start to feel insecure or ashamed of speaking. And then, they separate you from your community, right? Which is what it happens. And so then you don't even hear it anymore. And so you're not even with people who can speak it. Thankfully, I was in foster care with my brothers. So I always had contact with my family, but my mother had been, wasn't always speaking either, right? Because of her experiences. So some of my family speaks it really well and some of my family doesn't. My dad is younger and never went to residential school. He's like a lot younger than my mother. So he speaks fluently, and his sister speaks fluently. So I keep thinking, but again, there's a relationship I didn't develop until I was 15. So it's like, now I think, okay, let's shift gears on getting to know each other and like dive into the language. Maybe that's a better way to get to know each other, So I think about all of those things when I think about language. My other brother, I'm just going to call them all brothers, not give them names. The other night, that was 2 nights ago, we were sitting at the table and we were talking about how we did that project, Braids of Resistance. So that was one of the arts projects we did down at for that fancy contemporary art gallery down in Toronto on the waterfront. Power plant. Jesus, like you need the one. Think of it for a minute there at the power plant. And part of what we were doing was to me, him, and Elwood Jimmy. We're trying to understand our resistance to singing and playing and learning to drum, and also our resistance to speaking. So often the singing is also in our language, right? So we have it's not that it's not there, but there is this resistance or something that comes up inside of you that prevents you from going forward. And so we decided to make an art project out of it and invite everyone in, because like Sky, I think art is a good way to kind of work through this stuff. And we invited other people in who wanted to join in. So we had singing workshops, drumming workshops. We also created a bunch of braids, but that's a separate project, separate from what I'm talking about. And then, wanted to do this in public and create an intimate space in public. Because I think if you're not using it and sharing it outward, then you're always just, it never really becomes a part of you. You actually have to put it out. outside of yourself. So yeah, so that goes towards the other part of your question, which is about what the body remembers, and the body remembers a lot. I think the body's memory is deeper than our conscious memory. And actually science is catching up to that thought, And I think even the first time I spoke my language in school, taking a class with Shirley Williams, my mouth was perfectly prepared to speak. Like I pronounce perfectly, because my mouth was geared for it. So that accent that we were always made fun of for is actually our mouth's memory of how to speak our language. So even if your mother didn't pass you your language, she passed you the mouth that can speak your language once you pick it back up again. So I think those things we should be proud of, and we should be, diving into more and thinking about it. Your body tells you when something is wrong. It's like certain actions and certain ways of doing things in the world. You may not know where it comes from, but that's that deep knowledge, that's living out in your body that you may not be able to voice, but you have to trust. And to me, that's the intimate part of sovereignty, is like to trust those things, to listen to your body in that kind of way.
Yeah,
the traumatic body is not just trauma or victimhood, it's also like fucking wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, it gives us information. Yeah.
Well, and I think this also makes me want to ask about that outwardness of of putting this knowledge or these feelings and things that you're learning about yourself and your culture and your history, and not just learning, but have learned all your life. And that idea of putting it out into the world. So, I think about the ideas of learning academically, and often when you're learning academically, you want to learn a lot about something before you choose to present it to anyone or talk about it in any way, shape, or form. But you had mentioned that outward place of like putting the knowledge that you are gaining out into the world, even if it is imperfect, even if you're or imperfect. I don't even want to say imperfect, but because I think that it's perfect in the way that it's being learned, but imperfect in that idea of that you should have all the knowledge before you present something. And so I'm talking about it in a way where I think about, I guess, sometimes I'll be researching something about the history of Métis people on this land, and it'll bring me information about my family. But I don't necessarily always have all of the information. But it's still really wonderful to share the information. So my question is sort of getting to how do you decide when you want to begin sharing, and in what context you're willing to share? There are different ways and places that you may or may not decide to share that information.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One is like that deep knowledge that we have, and learning to trust it and use it. But then there is an aspect of learning that happens like for every single human being on this earth. If there's anybody who says they have the complete encyclopedia of Anishinaabe knowledge in their head, I'd like laugh. Because it's just fucking impossible. Because I think, oops, I'm swearing. Well, I do that, so it's okay, I think. So I think it's changing the idea of what knowledge is. Like if we're talking about embodied knowledge, right? Something that's lived, then it's always in process, right? It's never a finished thing. Sharing, I think, is something that is a completely personal kind of contract with yourself. I still share very little. Like I'm very, very private person. And as far as sharing culture goes, I'm very, very careful about it because just because we have too many opportunities for things being taken out of context, or to be perverted and or written down in a weird way. And that's going to happen. And at the end of the day, I've started sharing lots of things more and more, partly because I've been pushed by elders to do so. And because they, I've been told, and I've really, really sought hard inside myself to answer this question for myself. I don't think we can move anywhere without sharing. Like, me and my little private world, or us in our little private community, we need to share and we need to learn from others as well. And we've always been this kind of open people, like that vulnerability. When we're talking about sovereign intimacy, it's about that safety and vulnerability, right? Both the vulnerability of not knowing and being okay with that, and the vulnerability of knowing and sharing and worrying about what might happen with that. So I think that if we want to live sovereignty, we have to do it. We have to just start doing it and worry about what other people do. Like, stop worrying about what other people are going to do with it in a way. But as far as, there's certain cultural knowledge that's just for us, and that will always be the case. And there's certain kind of personal information that I will never share with any human being on this earth. Well, maybe I'll get good enough at having love relationships to share it with my partner. We'll see how well I can work through my trauma. And as far as academics go, forget about it.
Yeah, forget about it.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, I think academics have knowledge, and everybody has knowledge, and we can share them all together. Yeah. And to me, they're more equal than how it's treated in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just talking about that with a friend today because of this like instant reaction of some institutions to immediately get in touch with academics to write the exhibition essays, which I'm just so, I feel like needs to be challenged a little bit. So it's hard because I feel like there is this sense of also this institutional knowledge that then thinks it knows the knowledge. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like really like working within this context of always giving kind of affirmation to a specific type of knowledge, which is if academics produce this type of knowledge, then it must mean that it's usable for this type of context. And I feel like that's something that I'm definitely weary of as a curator, for sure, because I think art writing in itself can be a form of art, and that it can extend on and expand on the thinking of an exhibition.
Especially the way you do it.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
not everyone can do that. FYI. But I was like, I was thinking about, because we're talking about art, right? And I think I don't want to say this out loud, but I kind of do. I just think when you get too far along a certain kind of research path that is very academic based, your art can really suffer because it actually takes you further and further away from yourself, and further away from your body, and further away from your intuition. Also your ability to tap into unseen forces and allow yourself to be a conduit, like all these different things that artists do. I think that it can make your work. I think two of the things I see is one, it gets so research heavy that it's everything in the kitchen sink has to be in it. You know what I mean? You can never strip it down to any kind of beautiful kind of moment where you're saying something meaningful. It's like you have to keep piling it on because that's what academics do, right? They just complicate. And then the other thing that can happen is that you get so far removed and cold to it that when you see the work, it feels so cold.
Yeah.
So I don't know. These are just the thoughts.
Yeah. I did want us to
I could be wrong.
I appreciate those thoughts for sure. Yeah. I think because they're also, I think it's in the way that you work so like so much of what I find you're also interested in is a kind of process-based practice in all its forms, you know, and I feel like that does have a lot to do with what you just shared with us about your own teachings and learnings in terms of your own culture and language, which is very much based in intimacy and relationships, you know, and so I feel like that is, you know, like for example, when I walked through Rebecca's show at the AGO, I could tell that this was also a curator-artist relationship that developed, and you could feel that walking through the show. And I really don't think, I feel like that's rare for me anyway, to notice the curator kind of rhythm and tone in the show itself, especially if it's a solo show. And so I felt like, yeah, that was something that was really quite, I was taken away with, yeah. But I do want to get back to just thinking about your art practice. I do want us to kind of also, I know that from knowing you for a very long time, that film was always something that was so important to you. I feel like I think you started curating as a film programmer. I feel like, you know, you studied film, and you studied film through philosophy and poetry. And I feel like you really, and literature. So I feel like you really, like cinema was always a part of your life in this way, but I think I don't know the story of when you decided to pick up a camera and when that moment was for you, why, and what compelled you toward it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I am a writer first. So picking up a camera for me had to do with writing. So I did start in kind of more of a fiction film kind of atmosphere. But I think I have an experimental body from dance. So when you bring those things together, video and film is kind of perfect place to do that in, because it kind of deals with all those things. But the first time, I think, what were we doing? I made a film about love. That was the first thing I did. But it wasn't about love, it was about touch. So it was thinking about which is something I'm trying to get back to. Actually, I've never made something that actually can capture this. Like, this is the other thing about film, is that sometimes there's things that are easier to write than to film, and sex, love, and intimacy and touch are the hardest things in the world to put an image to. If you want to film the thing that you're talking about. If you do what I did, which is like you look at landscapes and like you do airplanes and you do something completely outside of what you're talking about, then you can reach it actually easier. There's this beautiful a book I love, and Don't Judge Me, by Zizek, who's a philosopher, and it's heavy theory and academic, whatever. It's called The Fright of Real Tears. And in it, he talks about how we can't, that documentary can't touch sex, love, or tears. We never want the real thing. It has to be approached through fiction. So I think that's the first thing I tried to do, was like, how would we capture something as big as love in the tiniest touch, or the tiniest moments of physical intimacy that aren't kissing, aren't sex, aren't any of those things that we associate with it. So all the ways in which, a relationship is a relationship. Much better when you're dealing with people who don't talk much, because they already do that, right? Like, they have a natural way of filling that language gap with their body or with things they do for each other. Anyway, that's how it started. and then this lovely human in Toronto was doing a project for the Queer Film Festival in Toronto, Inside Out, the huge one. And he said he wanted to have some Indigenous folks make a video, actually. I should stop saying film when I mean video. And I said, well, how queer do you have to be? And he laughed. He's like, do you think you're queer? And I said, I'm totally queer. Like I said, but how queer? And then he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, do you have to be a lesbian, or can you be bi, or like, can you sometimes date women and sometimes date men? And then, like I was going through the whole thing, and he just started laughing so hard. And then, I was young enough to have to, like, there was no real role models for me in that, right? So I just lived my life how I live it, which is doing what I do, loving who I love. So when you make it an identity, I start getting freaked out, because I'm like, oh my God, now what does that say? Like, what am I saying? And am I taking space from somebody else? So anyway, he gave me the stamp of approval on queerness, and I made a film, and that got screened at festivals all across the country. And that was like a real eye opener. And that was a fiction based on a true story of taking my girlfriend home to the res, but everybody treated like a true story. And so then I got asked lots of personal questions in the audience, and then I refused to answer them.
Oh,
because it was a fiction.
You kept it a mystery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Sorry, I don't think that answered your question at all.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about something that feels so connected to this exhibition, which is just that it's really like the imperceptible of intimacy that we're getting at in terms of what that produces for us. That's not like predetermined, and that is always a surprise that we come at even in a different way. And like often when Jen and I describe the exhibition, we always say that it had us before we knew it, because it started with us building our relationship, and so I feel like we're really talking about a different form that is not, like you say, these are hard things to kind of grasp or even put a language to. And a lot of the artists, Iris is one of the artists who's in the exhibition, and in her artist talk, she mentioned this as well, where it's really hard to put language to the ways in which, or to define these processes that are without words yet, and without kind of a predetermined understanding of what those things are yet, and how they affect us. Anyway, I'm going to pass it to Jen. I wonder if you have questions.
Well, I think like there was this moment a few years ago where I was really struggling writing an essay for an exhibition I was curating, which is always the way it is. But there was someone that I was working with at the gallery that I was curating for, and they had said, I think I was struggling because I wanted it to sound really smart, or really want like all these things I had in my mind that really didn't matter at all. And I said, it's hard because I'm trying to like put forward my gratitude and the care that I have for all of these artists, and the ways that I feel about them, but also the ways that they feel about each other and the communities that they are part of. And this person said, Jen, like emotions are knowledge. You use the emotions as the knowledge that you're imparting. And I feel like that is a consistent thing that comes back for me about your work too, Wanda, like whether it is as a curator or as an artist. And so I'm wondering, I guess, you have talked a lot about that, but I think, thinking about emotions as a place of knowledge that you work from, and if you would mind talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I'm hardcore about it because I didn't do it for most of my life. So I think the point I made earlier about not, trauma is a kind of way of creating blockage to sharing emotions, especially. So if you want to reach like real love with somebody, you have to break down walls. You have to go through all that process of being vulnerable and all those things. That happens in like, one-on-one, it happens in friendships. but I want to take it to a political level. I want to take it to, another place. So I was thinking about when I was young, being the only Native kid all the time meant I had to be better at everything than everybody else. It meant I'm already a failure. And I rise or fall based on people's expectations. So because I don't give a shit one way or the other. So if somebody expects great things from me, I'll give them great things. If they expect shit from me, I give them shit. It's kind of like this way I have of, it's kind of a, maybe it's a childish resistance, but it's served me well my entire life. So I'll never get rid of it until somebody shows me it's a bad thing. But that means that in environments where I was treated, like I was called stupid my entire childhood, like a stupid Indian, whatever. So I literally thought I was stupid for a very long time. And then they did I will come back to what you're saying in a sec. They did this IQ test on me in grade 3 or 4 or something like this. And, I scored really, really high. And so they're supposed to put you in this special class for smart kids, but I had failed everything all the way through, the 4 years of my education. So they were like, there's no way we can do this. So then they proceeded to give me one of those tests, those comprehension tests of knowledge, all the way up until grade 5 or something, a couple grades ahead. Sort it. And so I was I didn't know this about myself. I had no idea that I had all that in me. You know what I mean? And so then when I got into this, so then they had to do it because they look like assholes, really racist, basically, if they didn't put me in by their own standards. And then I did really well in that class, in this small class of really smart. And who was all in there? All the fucking weirdos were in there, right? All the weirdos were in there. There was no one you would expect to be in there. So it made me actually even more driven towards everybody, to find those places inside of yourself and to live them, whatever they are, so prominently and unapologetically and sovereignly, I would say, that that brings things into the world that we can't even imagine, and that brings new new kinds of intimacies into the world as well. And now I've lost the train of how I was going to circle right back to what you said. Oh yeah. So then I was thinking about how as people of color, Indigenous people, we were always told our only knowledge was emotion. Our only knowledge was body. Our only knowledge was, personal stories, right? So as political people, we reacted against that and we said, okay, we can be as smart as you. We can bust out the theory. We can be academics. We can do all this. And we never have to share anything personal. We never have to be emotional. But they win. One day I woke up and I realized they win when I react that way, because I'm no longer Anishinaabe. I am basically, I would make a great lawyer. I would make a great judge. I would make a great white person in some kind of institution. I'm no longer Anishinaabe. And so in this weird way, taking up those things that they said we only had and realizing that we have all of the things, intelligence as well, and we have all the choice about who we are and where our knowledge comes from and what we want to be, then we don't have to deal with any perception of who we are. We can stop reacting, you know what I mean? And actually just build from this body, this mind, this heart, and these relations.
Thank you. I
came back to.
I so appreciate all of what you just said. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I could have just kept listening forever.
But I'm sure no one wants to listen anymore.
Yeah.
Are there questions from outside, or nobody wants to ask me anything?
Is a question that I can answer for you. Someone asked if you're a Libra, and I said, no, she's a Gemini.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there's another question from Laurel Scott in Lethbridge. I'm really curious about your opinion and perspective on intimacy with the land or nature and what that might mean to you if you want to talk about it.
That's a huge one, I think, and a beautiful one. I was thinking about this moment that actually I have done a lot of work with other foster kids too, and other people who've been displaced from their lands. Thankfully, I was never displaced long, so I can't claim as much hardship as other people. But it's not a game or a competition. So I just shouldn't have even said it. But this moment when people place their feet on their land again, even if they've been adopted out and raised in white families their whole lives, didn't have their family around them, never even met their family. And I know this because some family members have had this happen to them, and friends, and people I know. There is something about touching your feet to that ground. People feel an intense breakdown. It's like you cry, and all the, this empty feeling or this unfulfilledness thing, all this gets all these energies come up inside your body. And if you've been trained a certain way, it can feel irrational. You know what I mean? And you might not pay attention to that, but that's precisely what you should pay attention to. And this is the part that, social workers and other people don't understand, that it isn't just having some idea of what good love, good family, good fucking home, or all that shit is about. It's way different than that. Love is something else. And this love of land is something else. And it is deeply connected to who we are. And just seeing that reconnection, people who've been disconnected. But I also think about it in another way, the way in which our knowledge is built through time, spending time. It's durational. So I always say we haven't lost anything, because as long as we keep the land healthy and safe, and we keep, the waterways healthy and safe, and we keep the animals healthy and safe, we haven't lost anything, because all of our knowledge comes from there, right? So we can spend, we just need to spend the time. And our ancestors spent thousands of years building up this knowledge that was passed to us. We also have that knowledge in story and song, in lots of ways that we need to spend time understanding, learning, being with, not learning in the Western way, but being with it over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's also love, right? Yeah. So yes, time on the land is really essential. And it heals people, it heals youth, it heals adults, it heals, it's better than going to university, actually. But I'm not saying kids don't go to university. It's not what I'm saying. Wanda says, don't go to school. So, Mom, I'm not going to school.
Thank you, Wanda. That was beautiful. How about we end with one more question, which is, what are you reading right now? Or what film have you watched most recently that you love? Or what have you cooked recently that you loved? And we might have one more question after this from the audience. That's it.
I cooked that I loved. I cooked moose stew for my brother's birthday. And this is the third moose stew I've made this year, or the last 2 years. These are my first moose stews in my life. And damn, they're good. And everyone eats and everyone's happy. So there's that. And the thing I'm reading right now, I picked this up because I actually wanted to read a poem, but then I realized there wasn't time for that. So I had picked this up, The Color of Resistance, which is a really old book of Indigenous poetry and short stories by women. So that's what I was reading today. And then the movie I watched was Seven Samurai. by Kira Kurosawa. I watched that last night. It made me very happy.
Oh, amazing. Wow,
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in so long.
I know, but it's so good.
It's really, I remember it being amazing. Yeah. I guess we will take just this one question from the audience. Wanda, it is so wonderful to hear about your artwork. It is such a pleasure listening. One question that I didn't realize was a question for me, but is intimacy positive by definition?
Causative?
Positive.
Oh, positive. Oh, intimacy, oh, fuck no. Well, I mean, no, definitely not. Anyone who's been sexually abused can tell you it's not always positive. So yeah, that would be my short answer. I've been thinking a lot about this, and it's something really, I think there's a lot of knowledge in people who've gone through trauma that is intimate trauma. That is really hard to talk about, actually. That's why film, art, like everybody uses these mediums, because it's like not very easy to express in words what happens in those spaces. And yeah, so for sure, intimacy is not always positive. It can be a space of violence. Yeah. But I know some people would say, well, then that's not intimacy. I would argue to death that it is. People can love, people can hurt with love and with intimacy. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that is the most confusing part of it, because it feels like intimacy and it feels like love.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's also so much about what you had also talked about earlier, right? That there is that in terms of like colonization and its violence, severing intimate relationships, like, but also that is, you know, I don't even think of intimacy in terms of a word or a concept or a landscape as a positive or negative, right? Because it's so much about what kind of affect in the way that you had also talked about it in your film, is that it's really something that, and Billy Ray Belcourt comes to mind when I'm thinking this too, that it's, you know, he just did this incredible interview where he talked about the relationship between freedom and joy, and that where you don't, you know, although there's trauma, colonial trauma in this way, and that one acknowledges its existence, it's also, it's not necessary to dwell there, and that there is a movement toward freedom through joy, and talking about that in his own poetry and writing. And so I feel like that's what you gave us tonight too in your film, that there is also a way to kind of enable a different form of expression out of a very intimate story and a very intimate and personal history and lineage. And so thank you, I guess, is what I want to say.
I mean, it's interesting. There are ways in which you can refuse the intimacy of violence too, like just by how you are in response to it. Mm-hmm. But that takes quite a bit of work. Mm-hmm. We're not born with that, because we're not born with the capacity for understanding violence, I think, in some ways. But yeah, anyway, that's a whole other topic, but it's something I'm very interested in.
Mm-hmm. Jen, I just wanted to pass it to you one more time in case you had last comments or thoughts. Or
I'm just so grateful for your time and everything you said. I feel like I could listen to you for hours longer, which is always the way it is whenever I've heard you speak. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanda. I also have a couple of other thank yous before we go. You know, any work done at an institution like Plugin is done collectively with many people involved. So I'd like to give a big thank you to Luther Konedu, Plugin's public program coordinator, Erin Josephson Laidlaw, our operations manager, Madeline Defoe, our communications coordinator, and Allison Yearwood, Plugin's executive director. I want to give a really special shout out to the installation team at Plugin, who put so much work into the installations and into making the artists and the curators' dreams come true. And although we can't see the exhibitions right now, They really did an excellent job of installing Sovereign Intimacies, and they are Theo Sims, who's our head preparator here at Plugin, and he received assistance from Craig Love, Rob Snowbird, Colin Zip, Roger Crate, and Colby Richardson. I also want to express a big thank you to our tech team behind the scenes, Colby and Scott from Collective Broadcast Co., for facilitating our online live stream in order for us to gather tonight. And just one more thing before I go, I want to remind the audience of our next event that will take place on Wednesday, December 9th at 6 p.m. Central. Plugin will be hosting a durational reading by the incredible Norbese Philip as our final event of Sovereign Intimacies and as part of Zong Global 2020, which is the first online global iteration of the annual durational reading of Zong, her acclaimed book-length poem. The 10-day durational reading commemorates the massacre of 150 enslaved Africans, which began on November 29th, 1781, and continued for the following 10 days. In its eighth year of production, the sequential reading will consist of pre-recorded readings and collective performances of the texts, interspersed by 3 live simultaneous collective readings. These readings have been running since November 30th and will end on December 9th, culminating with this live reading hosted by Plugin and presented in partnership with Gallery 1CO3 with support from the Video Pool Media Arts Center. It is an event definitely not to be missed, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you, Wanda, again. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.